Appreciate Angel and also Ron's comments there. I know very little about rockets. I know a lot more about James Garfield. So if you have questions about James Garfield afterwards, you can ask me. Not about rockets, ask somebody else. But very, 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 very good stuff. So tonight we're going to wrap up some things that we started last week in talking about misunderstandings in John, okay? So last week we looked at several things from the first part of the Gospel of John. If we have time, we'll look at some stuff in the last part of the Gospel of John. But what I really want to do tonight is use something from philosophy that may have even been some of the things that John is playing off of, because those things in philosophy were actually before John wrote his Gospel, and talk more about these misunderstandings. But real quickly, just for a review, this is the last slide we looked at last week, is about why does John use misunderstandings, okay? He uses misunderstandings, first of all, to drive the narrative forward, okay? To continue the story along, and it also, with this, it causes this tension and curiosity, because you as the reader, you know something and you understand something that the person in the story does not understand. And so you are almost even trying to help them along, like, I can't believe you don't understand this type thing. And so it creates this tension, it creates this curiosity that keeps you moving in the story. And their misunderstanding leads to our understanding. Right? When Nicodemus misunderstands about the new birth, it helps lead us to understand what the new birth is. When the woman at the well misunderstands about living water, it helps us to understand about who Jesus is as the living water, okay? And so John is using these misunderstandings on purpose. In fact, we talked about this last week too, almost every single time Jesus opens his mouth in the Gospel of John, somebody misunderstands him. And so that helps lead us to our own understanding. And so the whole time they are understanding from below, or they misunderstand from below because they are from below, but we need to understand from above. Thinking about things on a spiritual plane and not just on a physical plane. Just kind of like the copy off of what Angel had, about thinking about success on a physical plane is one thing, but thinking about success on a spiritual plane is a whole different thing, and those two things do not look the same. And that's where we have this whole idea of this upside down kingdom, right? We have a different type of kingdom that is not built like the earthly kingdoms, okay? So here's our first question for this evening I want you to think about. And if you know something about this, then I'd love to hear what you know about it. But who is familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave? You heard about, some people are familiar with that. Okay, if somebody wants to give us a rundown. Josh, you want to give us a rundown of what kind of it is? Not to put you on the spot, but putting you on the spot.
Well, the allegory of the cave is basically trying to get at the nature of reality. So people are sitting in the cave, and all their lives they can only see shadows of things on the wall. And so then when they see the shadows are the only thing that is real to them, the only thing that they really understand. And then if they're allowed to walk out of the cave, they're able to see things more fully, but that was not something that you can understand just by looking at a shadow.
Okay, so very good. So Plato's allegory of the cave. So remember, Plato is a philosopher that is hundreds of years before Jesus, okay? And in his philosophy, he is talking about, it's a book called The Republic, where he's trying to talk about what would be the best type of society, and talking about these people that he refers to as these philosopher kings. But he brings up this idea of a cave. Okay, and I have some comic slides to help us out with this, okay? The first idea about this cave is that there are individuals that from their birth, they are chained, and they are chained to stare at a wall. They cannot move their head to look behind them, but they are chained to stare at this wall, and that's all they can stare at their entire lives. Behind them is a fire. And as this fire is burning, in between the fire and these people that are chained, different individuals will walk by with different objects. Maybe they'll walk by with what looks like a bird, or walk by with what looks like a dog, or maybe what looks like a pot. And as they find out, they realize that these things, these objects that they see, people are telling them that is what it is, okay? So when an object that looks like a dog, the shadow of a dog, that's to them, that is a dog. They can only understand the shadows because that's all they've ever seen. That's all they ever know about, okay? And as the allegory continues to go on, then Plato, who was talking to his friend about this in the Republic, he goes on to say, and what if one person is able to escape? That he is unchained from those things, and he turns around, and the first thing he sees is that fire. And if he looks at that fire, how do you think that would be experienced in him? Would that be a good thing or a bad thing? It's going to be bad. It's going to be bright. He's only seen shadows his entire life. The light from that fire is going to hurt his eyes. And then what if he is dragged out of the cave up into the real world? And now he sees sunlight for the first time. Again, he has been in the cave all of his life. It has been dark, and now he is able to see the light, if you will, and it is very, very bright. And he is very, very confused because when he looks at objects and sees the shadow, he thinks the shadow is what is real. But that's just a shadow. He sees the shadow of a tree, and he looks at the shadow and is like, well, that is the tree. But in actuality, the tree is the tree, not the shadow. But he only thinks the shadow is real because that's all he's ever known. That's all he's ever seen. Well, now with this new information that he is finally even able to look at the sun, which is the actual reality, the thing that is the most real, if you will. Then, because he has this new information, he wants to go back and help his friends. Because he has seen the truth, and so now he goes back into the cave again. But when he goes back into the cave, is the cave bright or is the cave dark? It's dark. If you have not lived in a cave or you have not been in a cave for a while, going into a dark cave, can you see? Not really well, not at all. But he goes back to his friends who are chained, and he tries to explain to them, hey, those things you see on the wall, that isn't real. That's just a shadow. The real thing looks totally different than that. And they look at him and they think, you're crazy. You're stupid. We know this is real. This is what we have seen all of our life. But he tries to say, no, what is real is actually up there. And they make fun of him, and they ridicule him, and they even resist him because they know what is true. And he's a lunatic and has no idea what he is talking about. Okay? The Gospel of John works very similar to that in a lot of ways. Okay? So philosophically, this is what Plato was trying to get across. Okay? So first of all, the cave. The cave is the world of ignorance. All right? It's a world that we all are born into, if you will. It's a world that we all are living in. And there are shadows that are on the wall, and those are what we think is real. Okay? And of course, when Plato is doing this, he's trying to show the importance of knowledge and the importance of philosophy and the importance of getting people out of their ignorance and getting them to understand truth and to move from being ignorant individuals to being somebody that would be better. So the shadows is what we think is real. And then the journey out, the man journeying out of the cave, is the process of his education, or we dare say the process of his enlightenment in a very real way. He's really coming to the light, if you will. And that process is painful. That process is about self-denial, because all the things that you thought are now no longer true. They were true to you for a very, very long period of time. But that type of truth was actually a bondage. It was actually a slavery, and it was not true at all. And then he leaves that, and he finally gets out to the sun, and to Plato, the sun is truth, okay? It is that which is good. He considered the sun to be what is perfect and what is good and what is actual reality. Then going back, returning to the cave, that's the philosopher's duty. The philosopher's duty is to teach, but his teaching is going to be rejected because those who are in the cave, they don't want to know what the light is because they're so captivated by the shadows on the wall and the darkness that is there. Okay, what's interesting about Plato, in his idea, the best of societies, the best of republics, was not a democracy, was not something where people can make decisions and vote on what is right or vote on what they want. And his reasoning behind that is because people are stupid. And they don't know what is right or wrong. But what you do need is you need a philosopher king. A philosopher king to come in, someone who is enlightened, and that person needs to lead the people. And that is the best type of society, if you will, where you have a philosopher king that the people will lead, that he will help lead them out of the cave into reality. Okay? So, with that framework in mind, let's think. What are some ways you think that we can apply that to John? I'll let you talk for a few minutes. Or am I totally out in left field here? Yes, Josh.
So Jesus has to tell them the real nature of things that they've never really understood before, and go back into the cave in a way and maybe try to use things they already understand to explain these to them.
All right, Jesus has to try to explain to people things that they don't understand. And even use some of the things, some of the shadows, if you will, to try to point out to them this understanding, this truth, to hopefully lead them out of the cave. What are some other things that you might see as, yes, Josh? I'm sorry, that was Josh. Judah.
Kind of like in the analogy of the cave, a lot of people, when Jesus is trying to explain things to them, they're like saying he's a lunatic and saying that he's wrong.
Yeah, for sure. Jesus, he sees things as they actually are. He is, in fact, in John 8:12, he says, I am the what of the world? I am the light of the world. And when this light goes back into the cave and tries to explain things that actually are the truth, what do people think? You're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean tear down this temple and in 3 days you're going to raise it up again? This temple took 46 years to raise. You don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean I have to be born again or born from above? You expect me to go back into my mother's womb and be born again? What are you talking about? What do you mean that you need to have living water? Sir, you don't even have a bucket and the well is deep. How can you say that you provide this living water? You must eat my flesh and drink my blood. Oh, so now you want us to be accountable. What do you mean about all these things? So you see all of this misunderstanding, all of this resistance, even resistance to the point that what ends up happening to this Jesus. He's going to end up being killed because they are resisting the light. They are resisting because all they've ever known is another thing. Okay? Any other tie-ins before I got some slides there for it? Yes, Chris.
I think the idea, going back to Plato's idea of perfect government, a philosopher king, that is what Jesus came to be. But what we see is that Plato had the right idea, but that could never work in human terms. Even in the kings of Israel, even when you had a good king, they still made mistakes, and then their influence was not able to live on even a generation after them.
Right. Definitely so, definitely so. And we'll look at a Greek word here in just a minute about that too. Yes, Neil.
If we go to Colossians 2, Paul uses a similar analogy when he says that Christ is the substance, and he's talking about the Old Testament being the shadow.
Right. The shadow of those other things. And Christ is the real thing, right? Is the real reality. And we've used this expression before. You can't really see it right now, but because the sun's over there, I am casting a shadow right there. And someone could look and see that shadow, and they might be able to tell that somebody is coming, but they don't know who is coming. They just see kind of the outline of it. But we all realize that shadow is not me. It just lets you know that me is coming that way, right? And so, and definitely we see all those things in the Old Testament were those types and shadows to show you what the reality is, who is Jesus, okay? I want you to look some real quick. I don't have a slide for this, but look over in John chapter 1 and look at what Jesus is called there, okay? John chapter 1 and in verse 1. In the beginning was what? The Word. All right, Greek, that's logos. Okay, that has an idea behind it, a Greek philosophy. The idea behind it is that is the truth. That is the thing that they were trying to get to, that understanding, that philosophical truth, that which was good that they were looking towards. And it's interesting that John, through the Holy Spirit, decides to use that word. They're saying that the thing that you've been looking for this entire time, guess who it is? It's this Jesus. And like Chris was saying, he is that philosopher king. He is the king that leads us out of ignorance, that we can follow after, that we need to find salvation in, okay? One bell is already wrong, so we'll go a little bit quickly, okay? So like the shadows, people misunderstand the words and the mission of Jesus. John chapter 1 and in verse 5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Or another way to translate that word, cannot comprehend it. Right? It doesn't, the darkness does not understand. It sees these things, but is trapped in their own ignorance, if you will. The truth or the light of Jesus can end up setting us free. Okay? The man in the story of the allegory, the entire time that he was in the cave, he was a slave and a prisoner to the cave. He was bound. He could only see what was the shadows that were put in front of him. He could never see anything else. But he was released. He was released to be able to see the light. That's the exact same thing that Jesus does for us, is he releases us from the bondage of the ignorance of this world, so that we can see that there is something bigger and better after it. That piggyback off what Angel said again, we have this idea of what success is. But Jesus allows us to realize that the type of success the world thinks is success is actually being chained and looking at a shadow and saying, well, that's a bird. No, it's not, you idiot. That's a shadow of a bird, right? That's not actually what it is. Over in John in chapter 8 and in verse 32, right after Jesus talks about the light of the world and all of those things. Verse 31, so Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, if you abide in my word, and you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The truth can set us free. Returning to the cave is oftentimes met with great resistance. Over in John in chapter 3, when Jesus, or at least John, is giving commentary on what Jesus is doing, what Jesus is thinking here, he says in verse 19, and this is the judgment, the light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. Isn't it interesting sometimes to talk to some of our friends that are out in the world and try to explain things about Christianity? Try to explain things about this type of stuff, and they almost look at you like you have two heads. This doesn't make sense. Well, why would you spend your time and energy and money doing this and that when you could be doing something else? Right? Well, in the story of James Garfield, the anecdote there, how in the world could there be something more important than the country that you are supposed to be president of right now, sir? Well, I've got an appointment that's been set. It's been set for a really, really long time, long before I decided to be president, okay? And that's the same type of idea here. And these people resist the darkness. Resist the light, because they are so used to the darkness that it is met with this resistance. True knowledge is out of the cave. That's the goal of us, okay? We're all born, if you will, in the cave. We're all born from below, but we want to be born from above. Remember John 3 and verse 3, that you will not see the kingdom of God unless you are born again, or born from above. Also over in chapter 8 in verse 23, really close to what we read just a moment ago, there Jesus says these words. He says, you are from below, I am from above. You are of this world. I am not of this world. But guess what? We don't have to be of this world either. In fact, that's what we are told, that we are not of this world if we are following after Jesus. Salvation is outside of the cave. Now, you can live in the cave all you want to, but that's not the existence that brings about light and life and salvation. But you know what's really, really easy? Just to stay in the cave. Just to go along with the ignorance and not care about anything else. Okay? Real quick, I'm going to highlight a couple other things. Over in John chapter 8, verses 33 through 36, there's some more misunderstanding. The Jews said that we have never been slaves. And they have forgotten they had been slaves physically, and they currently are slaves spiritually. For him who does sin has become a slave to sin. Right? Peter in the upper room in John chapter 13, Peter tells Jesus that you will never wash my feet. How dare you demean yourself to wash my feet? But what he misunderstands that is he wants to have a part of Jesus. Then Jesus has to wash him. He has to cleanse him if he's going to have a part of him. You have Thomas and the others in the upper room in John chapter 14, where they're like, we've never seen the Father. Show us the Father. And Jesus is trying to make the point, if you want to see what the Father looks like, it's me. You're not understanding this because you are so physically minded, you're so earthly minded. Because you're in the cave, you're not getting this. But what's interesting as we go out later on in the Gospel of John, so many times you get little tidbits where it says, and the disciples later on, they looked back at this and they understood. They understood later because now they were out of the cave and they were able to see things as they were. Yes, sir.
Why did Jesus use parables to explain to the people the reality outside of the cave instead of just telling straight facts?
Why does Jesus use a parable to explain the reality of things outside of the cave instead of just straight facts? The same reason why when you're trying to show the light of a path to somebody, you don't shine the light directly into their eyes. You show them the way to go. And what's interesting is that later on in John 16, maybe, can't think of the verse right off the top of my head, but it's going to say that Jesus, I've been talking to you in figurative speech, but the time is coming when I will talk to you basically without figures of speech. Because the whole reason for these parables, the whole reason for all of this other symbolism and stuff is trying to explain heavenly things to an earthly minded audience. To get an earthly minded audience to understand heavenly things. Yes, Bridget. What is it? 16:25. Let's see. Yes. That was really close. I have said these things to you in figures of speech. The hour is coming when no longer speaks to you in figures of speech, but will tell you plainly about the Father. So the disciples, they also needed these figures of speech. They also needed these parables, this type of things, so that they could understand. But later on, they were going to understand very, very clearly. Of course, in the same context, we're talking about the Spirit coming to them. And that's going to help them open their eyes to understand all the things that Jesus is saying. So that later on, that they'll think back in history. And that's what's so cool about John writing this, and he's writing this so many years later, is he's thinking about the things that happened in his life when he was with Jesus, and more things are clicking. It's like, oh, and the disciples later understood that, and they believed. And the disciples understood that, and they believed. Other questions or comments? Got one more slide. All right, so here's what we need to understand. Here's what hopefully we get at with all of this stuff as far as the misunderstandings, the idea of the allegory of the cave, and all of those things. First of all, we need to be patient with those who misunderstand. Jesus was patient with them also. Okay? Over in 2 Timothy in chapter 4, verses 1 and 2 is the preacher's mission, if you will. It says, preach the word, be instant in season and out of season, rebuke, reprove with all long suffering. That's the hard part. It's that with all long suffering. Because a lot of times we go back into the cave and we're talking to somebody and we go, why can't you see it? It's so clear. Be patient. This misunderstanding can be the first step towards understanding, right? It's part of a process. Be patient. Jesus was very patient with these individuals too, okay? And then secondly, as far as way of application, let truth shape our assumptions. Don't let our assumptions shape truth. Don't be the one that's in the cave and when you leave the cave, still are having your mind shaped by the things that while you were in the ignorance and in the cave. Okay? Let all of your doctrine, let all of your preaching, let all of your practicing, all of those things be shaped by this. Don't take things that you already have in your head and then take God's word and try to shape it into what you want it to be like. Okay? Because that's when you become God. We don't want that. Let God be God. Let God be true and every man a liar, right? And let God be God and let us follow after the things that he has for us there also. Okay? As I mentioned, the Gospel of John is just so incredibly enriching. There's so many different ways to look at this gospel. And these misunderstandings is one of those things. So as you continue to study, as you study John, as you study other gospels, as you study other narratives of Jesus' life, look for the misunderstanding and see how that their misunderstanding can lead to your understanding. Any last questions or comments before we close with prayer? All right, let's close with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we do thank you so very much for another day, another time of worship, another time of studying. Father, we're so thankful for the different blessings you have given in our life, the different blessings that you have given us to be able to be successful in this life. To help us to realize that true success is found inside of your Son, Jesus Christ, and how that we as Christians, those of us who have put on your Son in baptism, that we are people that are now a new person in a new position with a new purpose. And those purposes are outside of the cave and outside of the misunderstanding. Help us be people that are constantly trying to be shaped by the truth. And we cannot be shaped by the truth unless we are willing to go through that process, that sometimes painful process of removing the things that we thought and filling them up with the things that you teach us instead. Father, help us also to be those people that would go back to others, the people that are chained in their ignorance, chained in staring at the shadows, and try to show them a different way. And help us be patient in trying to understand those things. And help us all be people that are following after that true philosopher king, that the true king of all things, being your Son, Jesus Christ. Father, we love you so much. We thank you for loving us so much. Watch over us as we depart from this place this evening. And just give us your grace and mercy and blessings, and help us in return to give that grace and mercy and blessings to those around us.